Hello, welcome to our fifth video in our series on the topic of religion and life. This session is all about the abuse of the environment. Our objectives today are to understand the different ways in which humans are using and abusing the environment, and we're going to be considering a Christian response to some environmental issues. What do you need to know today? You need to know that humans are damaging the earth. And Christians see themselves as the stewards of God's earth, with their responsibility to look after it. And so they do what they can, or they try to protect the environment. Let's jump on. In our previous lesson, B4, we looked at two really important ideas, dominion and stewardship. And we talked about dominion as being the concept that God has given the responsibility for humans to rule over the earth. And stewardship is that idea that it's responsibility really to look after the earth on his behalf. We talked about this picture there of, imagine you were coming to my house and I was going away for the weekend and you were in charge. I'd want you to look after the house. And in the same way, Christians believe that they're looking after the earth on God's behalf. This is really important to have at the back of your mind while we think about how humans use and abuse the environment. Well, we're going to look at some different ways in which this occurs, but the first one is pollution. Pollution literally means the contamination of something. And this happens in different ways. So there's air pollution, and you can probably see, if you live anywhere near a city, air pollution with your own eyes. But actually, it's a silent and invisible killer. And air pollution can harm humans. It harms animals. If you Google stats on the deaths every year for humans from air pollution, you might be pretty shocked by that. There's also land pollution. If you've ever, and I hope that you haven't, but if you've ever dropped litter, then you have contributed to land pollution yourself. And it's contaminating the land, which can lead to the death of animals. It can lead to plastics getting into the environment that then damage things later on. It can damage plant growth, all sorts of other things as well. So there's air pollution and land pollution. There's also water pollution, and this occurs in loads of different ways. One is pesticides that might be used by farmers that then runs into rivers. Again, it can destroy wildlife. It can contaminate whole areas. It can stop drinking water being available, and lots more issues too. There's other types of pollution, like light pollution, which the effects of which aren't quite as devastating as some of these other types of pollution, but it can be very unpleasant. If you've ever been to a part of the world where you can see the sky at night and the clouds are cleared and you can see the most stunning array of stars and planets and shooting stars and all sorts, it's wonderful. But especially in the UK, we're always pretty close to a city, so we miss out on that, and that's because of light pollution. Another type of pollution that's not quite so devastating is sound pollution. And if you live near an airport, that could be something that just disrupts life for you and just doesn't make life as wonderful as it could be if that sound and noise wasn't there. So these are all these types of pollution. All types of pollution can cause a bigger problem. And a big problem that I'm sure you know all about already is the idea of climate change. Now, climate change is the concept that the Earth is warming up. Global warming is a term we use to say that the average temperature around the world is increasing. And some people are like, oh, great, now I won't have to go on holiday to get a tan so much when I live in the UK. But actually, that's quite a short-sighted way of looking at it. You see, if the temperature increases, then the plants that we have in the UK at the moment and other parts of the world will have to adapt to that extra heat, or they're just going to die out. And when plants die out in a big way, that affects the oxygen in the air, it affects the animals who are reliant, the insects, etc. And everything, as we know it, could change drastically. So it's a really, really big issue. And scientists are very clear that we can do things now to slow down the process of climate change. And they involve things like not using fossil fuels, not polluting, recycling when we can, reusing, etc. Another big issue, this is the big issue number 3. So we've got pollution, we've got climate change, and we've got the destruction of natural habitats. That's right. Now, you probably know about this already, but the Amazon rainforest, for example, is being destroyed every single day. Huge parts of it. And this is a really serious problem. Partly, we've got some wonderful wildlife that's getting wiped out because their homes are being destroyed. I've got a picture here of an orangutan, which are an endangered species now because of human interaction with their habitats, taking those away. Whenever you remove part of a habitat like that, you're causing some big problems. One issue we've had obviously recently is coronavirus, and this pandemic has been brought by some scientists believe by the increase of bats in a certain area. And the reason that bats have increased is because the natural habitats have been shrunk down, and the bigger animals that kept those smaller rodent and bat animals at bay have had to be moved off or have died out, and so now we've got more rodents than before. And this is all linked to this idea of the natural habitats being destroyed. Talking about the Amazon specifically, the Amazon rainforest is known as the lungs of the earth because it produces a huge amount of oxygen and gets rid of a load of carbon dioxide. And that's a really big problem for us worldwide. And again, this is leading towards climate change. And the fourth thing you need to know about is the use of the resources on Earth. Things like fossil fuels, like oil and coal. And these are really helpful things that help us live our lifestyles in the way we want to. But the use of fossil fuels is quite devastating. We don't have a huge amount of them, and they are running out. But also when we use and we burn fossil fuels, it's damaging the environment and again leading towards climate change. So scientists are really keen to try and find sustainable ways of using fuel that's not going to run out, renewable energy sources so that we're not reliant on these fossil fuels and they're not going to continue to damage the environment. So got some questions for you guys. If you want to pause here, have a go at these, and then when you're ready, push play and we'll talk through the answers. Okay, let's check your understanding. So what is pollution? Pollution is the contamination of something. Different types of pollution include air pollution, which can damage human health and kill people, land pollution, which can damage crops and animals and insects. You've got sound pollution and light pollution, which harm our lifestyle and make it less pleasant to live effectively. And these things can lead to climate change. Climate change is a gradual increase in the average temperature around the world. It worries scientists because they're not sure that life as we know it can continue the way it is if the Earth continues to raise its temperature. There's worries about natural habitats being destroyed. There's worries about plants not being able to survive, which will damage our whole ecosystem, and lots more issues. Rising sea levels is another one. Why is the destruction of natural habitats a problem? Well, firstly, it's wiping out wildlife, which is a really sad thing to think about. But also, we talked about the Amazon being the lungs of the earth, and so we'd have less oxygen, and that's going to cause a huge problem worldwide. Also, with destroying natural habitats, you're limiting the amount of bigger animals, and so the smaller rodents that often spread diseases are far more common and have far more freedom to move around and make people ill. Why are scientists keen to find alternatives to fossil fuels? Because they're running out, and when we use them, we damage the environment. How can a Christian be a good steward regarding pollution, climate change, and natural resources? Well, we're actually going to look at that in the next slide. And then that extension there, pollution, it's just a fact of life. How would you respond if someone said that to you? Would you go, yeah, that is a fact of life. We want the lifestyle we want. Pollution comes with it. Or do you think there's another way of looking at things? Do you think we can live without pollution? So you'll recognize these if you've watched many of my other videos. In the GCSE, you'll often get asked, well, how does a Christian deal with this? What does a Christian do about this? And I always tell my students, think about these three things: prayer, money, and time. So let's think about pollution to start with. What can a Christian do about pollution? Well, they can pray that people stop polluting. They can give their money to a charity that helps to prevent pollution in the UK, and they can give their time by picking up litter. You see, it works for most things. Let's think about another one. What can a Christian do about climate change? Well, they can pray about climate change. The governments will change their policies and use less fossil fuels and encourage renewable energy sources. They can give their money to a charity that fights in aid of reversing climate change and raising awareness, and they can spend their time educating people about it and doing things like picking up litter, like recycling, the stuff of everyday life, that they can do their small part to change the bigger picture. So a little tip there for you guys in future: if you get a GCSE question on what should a Christian do or how can a Christian do it, these are your three things. Now, that's not a question to talk about stewardship in terms of the beliefs. That's the beliefs part. This is the practices part. You know, what can a Christian do? So 2 more questions. Pause there, have a go. When you're ready, push play. So let's check your understanding. What can a Christian do to protect the environment? They can pray about people and the government's changing rules so that would happen. They can give their money to a charity that works for these things, protecting the environment, and they can give their time by doing things like picking up litter, spreading awareness, recycling, upcycling, all those wonderful things. Climate change is the biggest problem for Christians today. Do you agree? So hopefully you had a good go at this. This is similar to a 12 marker that you might get in a GCSE. And on one side, you want to say, yes, it is a huge problem, and talk about why it's a huge problem. You'd want to talk about the effects of climate change. You'd want to talk about stewardship, this responsibility to look after God's earth on his behalf. You'd want to talk about how the earth has intrinsic value because God made it. That's that wonderful Psalm 23 verse 1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. That's on one side. On the other side, you want to think about what other issues, what other problems could there be for Christians today? Things like sin, perhaps, or perhaps evangelism, or learning more about God or worshipping him. You could say that you could argue all those things were more important, but that would be a great 12 marker to have a good think about this topic and the overall picture of Christianity too. Your extension there was to look up that website greenchristian.org.uk. Hope you had a chance to do that. And that brings us to the end of our lesson today. So let's revisit our need to know. You need to know that humans are damaging the earth, and Christians, seeing themselves as stewards of God's earth, they try to do what they can to protect the environment, and hopefully you know a few ways that they do that now. Have a wonderful day. See you in the next video.